It's here. The live-action Loud House had premiered earlier this month with a second episode that I'm going to be discussing today, and to be perfectly real with you, after watching these two episodes, I really don't know what to expect, other than they're better than the Christmas film, but at the same time, it really feels like that this show is trying way too hard to be its own thing, and yet at the same time, it's not doing any favors for the audience who were really against the idea of live-action Loud House after the Christmas film premiered last year. Watching these episodes from beginning to end, after making my analysis of Lincoln Loud, all I can think of is these characters are supposed to be different compared to their cartoon counterparts. Like, when the Christmas film premiered last year, I can understand the reaction onto why people hated it, especially of how Lincoln Loud was portrayed. But after watching this episode and how he was portrayed in the last episode, it just gave me the impression that they just wanted to make Lincoln Loud hateable, but at the same time tried to make him do good deeds towards the end of each episode. Lincoln wants to get out of doing any chores around the house, but this ends up him and Clyde being in police territory, which leads to them saving the day, but that doesn't change the fact that they had a speeding ticket. If that plot wasn't enough for you to be convinced, then in all honesty, I don't blame you if you didn't watch this episode. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest, after watching these two episodes, my perspective towards the Christmas film has changed. Not because I found it a terrible film, like I fully realized that, but the fact of how it's portraying its characters in a scenario involving live action. I know things are gonna be toned down when it comes to cartoon into live action, especially on a TV budget, but whenever I completely see any of this, along with the other characters, despite the actresses or actors trying the hardest to put these characters into live action form, it just feels like that they're experimenting the characters rather than recreating them, to the point that whenever I see the other characters in this, mainly Lenny, regardless if they're supposed to be different than they were in the cartoon, all I can think of is, wouldn't this been a lot more better if it was a different show rather than The Loud House? Because for me personally, whatever I think about these characters and the fact that they don't have a closer relationship similar to the later seasons, even if it involves teamwork, this episode's way of teamwork is while most of the characters are locked in the basement, while Lincoln and Clyde are in police territory. And when it comes to Lynn Saw in this episode, it's no surprise that they're just showcasing of how difficult it is to be a parent by looking after 10 children. Apparently what they added to Lynn Saw's character in the live action series is that he's using his eye vision. In all honesty, it's not really a problem, but just seeing that he couldn't be able to find Lily even though he's holding on to her, goes to show that they just made Lynn Saw way different, despite the fact that he is the same actor voicing Lynn Saw in the animation version. When it comes to the characters being locked in the basement, Lola is watching Vampire Bloodbath with Lucy, which could be a reference to the later seasons involving their relationship, especially the season 3 episode where Lola took Lucy's doll without permission. But in all honesty, I can't be able to look into these characters because while Lola is trying her hardest, Lucy on the other hand is difficult to be taken seriously in live action. If I'm gonna be honest with you, it's one thing to make a cartoon character who is a goth core into reality, but when you have Lucy in the animation show being more expressive than the one in live action, then you know that's really not a good sign for the actress playing Lucy in this show. The one actress I actually liked was the one playing Lin Jr. in this, especially since that she's practicing to become an announcer or commentator. If anything, considering that in season 6, while Lin Jr. needs to experience what a cheerleader is like, it actually feels accurate to have her being an announcer, especially in live action form. And for me personally, out of all the live action characters in this show, I actually felt that Lin Jr. was pretty much the best out of all of them. Granted, you can make the argument that she could be unlikable if she's ever paired with Lincoln in the future episode, but if it doesn't end up as a terrible episode like the Taunting Hour, then I'm going to assume that there's a chance that she might be one of my favorite characters from this show at least. I mean, when it comes to the cartoon show, I'm not even sure if I can be able to enjoy her character knowing for what that she has plenty of bad episodes. But in all honesty, when it comes to the other actresses, regardless if I didn't enjoy them, it really feels like that they're really thrilled to be playing these characters, mainly Lisa. Granted, it's understandable that she is way older in this compared to her cartoon counterpart, but to be honest with you, if you actually expect a younger child to do the role of Lisa Loud, it would probably lead to a huge disaster involving production, mainly just trying to take the right shot, all the while just trying to have the young actor mesmerize their lines for each episode. If I'm gonna be honest, I try to forgive these live action decisions, but considering that people are just going against this completely, regardless if they just want to find an excuse to despise live action cartoons, then you clearly don't even know what casting really looks like when it comes to live action in comparison of just finding voice actors to voice the characters in cartoon form. But in all honesty, the rest of the episode really feels like a combination of cover girls and chore and peace, while the characters avoiding doing their chores or go on strike. But in this episode, it's just mostly Lincoln avoiding doing his chores in order to be in a virtual reality beach simulator with Clyde. You know, considering that Lincoln and Clyde are getting more focus in the live action version in the same style as in the cartoon show, I'm just going to assume that they just didn't know what to do with Lincoln's relationship with the other sisters, considering that in the last episode they covered for him in order to have a marathon with Clyde. But anyway, what I said earlier about them making Lincoln Loud hateable while doing good deeds at the end, I don't even think that it's going to be a major factor in this show. Like, it may happen in the first 2 episodes, including the Christmas film, despite how terrible what he did towards everyone. But the way I see it, it really feels like that if they really want Lincoln Loud to be hateable while trying to do good deeds at the end, they'll completely just reusing elements from the Loud House show. And while doing chores around the house is an acceptable element that they did in the past, it doesn't change the fact that they just make Lincoln a completely different character in order to make him overconfident and somewhat cocky. And while I am fully aware that he was those attributes in the original, they weren't like this. The good deeds that I'm referring to isn't the fact that Lincoln cleaned up the entire house with Clyde without the help of his sisters. It's mainly the fact that he captured a criminal who was in disguise. So apparently the only reason onto why that Lincoln and Clyde are mostly arrested is the fact that so that Lincoln can do a good deed by finding criminals. I don't even know what this show's logic is when it comes to Lincoln trying to do good deeds, but all I can see is that the criminal is the same actor who played Gustavo from Big Time Rush. I just noticed that after watching this episode, and if this is literally the only way I can recognize these types of characters rather than the episode itself, then I'm honestly speechless. Like, this is pretty much the closest way I'm ever going to give praise to an episode involving actors I've witnessed from previous shows of Nickelodeon. Here's the thing. When they use Lincoln's attributes when it comes to the man with a plan by trying to convince the officers that the imposter is just stealing ice cream or doing something devastating with the ice cream, it just made me convinced that would this be any better in cartoon form rather than live action? Because in all honesty, it will probably shorten up the time rather than extending it to 22 minutes. And whenever I see Lincoln and Clyde in this, all I can think of is they just want to avoid anything by any means necessary while also completely forgetting everything that ever happened to them in previous seasons if this took place years after the original series. And the reason why I'm not looking into Lincoln's character that much in this compared to how he was portrayed in the cartoon show is because every single character around Lincoln is lifeless. It's not because they're in live action with tweaks, it's the fact that they do not have a massive reaction of what happens. I clearly had reactions in live action regardless if it wasn't from a cartoon. And you mean to tell me that you can't be able to give these characters actual reactions? Makes me question of how Lincoln's character in the Christmas film just feels difficult to be going against even after a year it premiered. I know I'm not looking into these materials much more seriously, but watch this. Lincoln Loud manages to get out of doing any chores by not emptying the vacuum bag. And he did the same thing with the police officer by mopping the floors in order to pay with the speeding ticket. By mopping anything on the police officer's desk or counter, which leads to the police officer doing the mopping. This just goes to show that any adult in cartoon or live action form is completely lifeless. This would have been much more understandable if the police officer would probably punish Lincoln and Clyde for doing the stunt, well, mainly Lincoln, in order to make me convinced that Lincoln Loud is a terrible character. But the fact that everyone around him is completely lifeless and not having any sorts of intelligence, despite nearly arresting Lincoln and Clyde, then it just goes to show that everything I've witnessed from this show, especially in the Christmas film, consequences aren't really that physical. And considering that Lincoln had non-stop community service at the end of the Christmas film, all I can think of is this is honestly difficult for me to take Lincoln Loud's punishment seriously, or just see that Lincoln Loud isn't always the good character when he's being mistreated. In all honesty, if you guys are still against the idea that Lincoln Loud isn't always innocent, then how is it believable to see the other characters around him act completely different or worse than him that completely overshadows his personality and problems? Because in all honesty, this is the biggest example of them all. And I don't even know if anyone is ever going to realize that everyone around Lincoln is also part of the problem. Being the victim and enemy just doesn't usually work for me, unlike Steam Team WK did his review on Brawl in the Family. Because all I can think of is it's difficult to go against a character all the while that he's being the victim, because being two things just doesn't usually work for me, knowing full well that the other characters are supposed to be into this entire thing when the consequences that they're getting are really, really unavoidable. Like, to be fair, the sisters in this episode didn't do anything terrible, but it also goes to show that Lincoln, no matter what situation he's in, it's just mainly out of luck that he either gets out of being the bad guy or sometimes being mostly the bad guy no matter what he does. Though if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, Steam Team WK's moments of talking about Lincoln in his Brawl in the Family review is either the fact that he didn't look into all the details of how bad that episode is, especially that Lincoln didn't know anything about the Sister Fight protocol, or it's either a way for him to instantly expose Lincoln to be a terrible person. Not really a terrible person, but mainly a terrible character for how he's portrayed. You know, if he ever watches my videos, which I'm pretty sure he hasn't, then you're not really convincing me of how Lincoln is any different than his sisters. Like, he may be, but when it comes to episodes, then I'm sorry. No matter what, it doesn't change the fact that the sisters did a lot worse than Lincoln, and for how he was portrayed in Brawl in the Family, it's most likely the fact that you're forgetting that he's the man with a plan, but due to flannelization or anything, it just makes me convinced that you're just trying way too hard to see Lincoln just as worse as his sisters, but at the end of the day, it's just difficult to see that even from Brawl in the Family. I may agree with your points in Kings of the Con, and maybe no such luck, but in all honesty, are you missing most of the other details in this? I'm not judging you, I'm just being really honest with you. I know this shoutout has nothing to do with this review whatsoever, but since that we're talking about Lincoln Loud, it's really accurate to discuss about it, because, to be honest with you, when I made my YouTube tribute of Steam Team WK, I'm starting to have second thoughts. I'm not going to delete it, but at the same time, it really feels like that some of his reviews, especially Brawl in the Family, really feels a bit really off, if you ask me. Like, it may be his opinion and he sees the episode differently, but at the same time, I really felt like that he should probably make a video involving Lincoln Loud similar to when I made my video involving Lincoln Loud months ago. Getting back into the Chore thing, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. It's what it is, and the last episode is better than this episode. Because for me personally, it really feels like that this entire episode really feels like a YouTube video of the Loud House rather than a television show involving the Loud House. Yes, it may have the budget of a TV show in live action form, but at the same time, I can't even expect much involving this live action version. But at the same time, I can't really say that this is the reason why the CrossFit contest came to an end. Like, if SpongeBob is willing to have 3 shows running at once despite the fact that Camp Cola hasn't been airing new episodes since last year and the Patrick Star Show hasn't been airing episodes as of late, but considering that this show along with Fairy Otter are airing on Nickelodeon at the moment, I'm going to assume that Nickelodeon is putting the focus on this and the Fairy Odd Parents live action show. But at the end of the day, this doesn't feel as bad as people make it out to be, but that doesn't automatically mean that it's good. Like, I do not have any plans on reviewing future episodes from this show, even though I'm gonna be watching them, but the only episode or special that I'm gonna be reviewing is the plot centering around Lincoln and his 5th possible love interest. As if it wasn't enough with Lincoln being paired with Ryan, Christina, Paige, Gold Jordan, and Stella, there was another girl in town. But we'll just see how that episode or special performs before I have the opportunity to understand the plot of those episodes. She appears in 2 episodes, one 22-minute episode and the other is the 44-minute episode. Let's just say that this could be a gem or a worse effort to give Lincoln another love interest, but I'm not gonna be able to review I Wanna Hold Your Hand in December since I have Lonely's 25 Days of Christmas happening during that month. But when it comes to the next episode, there's a possibility. With that being said, I'm giving this episode a 5.5 out of 10.